The $3,600 check had a little cartoon cherub printed in the corner, like that would soften the fact that my entire life's savings had just been erased. I'd spent 23 years restoring shattered museum porcelain to a finish so seamless that even the curators couldn't spot the repair. And now, I was being handed a settlement that wouldn't cover a month's rent in my own building. I held the hollow ceramic gnome in my hands, its cracked hat cool against my palm, and I knew that check wasn't a settlement, it was a taunt. What my daughter-in-law Kara didn't know, couldn't possibly have known, was that inside that very gnome was the original contract that would unravel her $500,000 fraud, void the entire sale, and land her in a cotton smock emblazoned with the words "Chipped Trust," hand-glazing garden ornaments stamped with her own criminal docket number. My name is Evelyn Hall. I'm 53 years old, a widow, and for over 2 decades I was the senior ceramics conservator at the Thurgood Museum of Decorative Arts. I specialized in invisible restorations. A shattered Severs vase, a mason figurine snapped at the ankles, I would repair them using syringes of medical-grade epoxy, reversible acrylics mixed to the exact pigment, and endless patience. I could match a Glaze refractive index so perfectly that under ultraviolet examination, the repair would fluoresce exactly like the original. My husband Thomas used to joke that I could put a soul back into a broken teapot. He wasn't wrong. Thomas was an architect. He designed quiet, elegant homes, deep wraparound porches, hidden courtyards with century-old oaks growing right through the decking, and window seats that caught the morning light. He sketched everything by hand with a 2B pencil, the same one he'd used since college. We built a life that looked, from the outside, as seamless as my restorations. 2 children, a son named Brent and a daughter who lives in Oregon, and 2 granddaughters, Lily and Rose, ages 7 and 5, who believed that fairies lived in the moss around our pond. 2 years ago, after a long battle with a developer who wanted to bulldoze the old mill district, we'd acquired an incredible historic collection of 1920s German garden gnomes from the estate of a local eccentric named Hilda Vogel. 47 pieces in total, all from the Heisner and Eckhart workshops, with hand-painted faces, original molds, and provenance letters that dated back to the Weimar Republic. We paid $113,000 from my widow's inheritance, money Thomas had insisted I keep in my name alone, and we turned the old textile mill's ground floor into Gnome and Thorn, a pottery painting studio and gnome museum. I poured my heart into restoring the fragile pieces, designing the glazing stations, curating fairy garden workshops for children. It became my second act. Kara, my son Brent's wife, came to me with big, watery eyes and a trembling voice, saying she felt lost and wanted to build something real side by side with me. I believed her. We notarized a binding 50/50 partnership, with a special clause that Lily and Rose would receive a lifetime supply of themed gnomes for their fairy gardens. I saw it as the beginning of a family legacy, a way to pass down creativity and love. Thomas was more cautious. He once told me over a cup of chamomile that Kara had the charm of a Tudor rose and the thorns to match. I teased him for being paranoid. I should have listened. Thomas died 3 weeks ago. A massive heart attack, right there at his drafting table while sketching a greenhouse for the granddaughters. The pencil was still in his hand when the paramedics arrived. I stood in the hospital hallway clutching a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, and by the time I got home, Brent and Kara were already in my kitchen, opening cabinets as if they were inventorying a foreclosure. Brent is 41, with Thomas's broad shoulders but none of his depth. He'd been the golden child, the one whose every bad grade was blamed on a rigid teacher, whose failed tech startup was just bad timing, and whose current job at a cell phone store was beneath him. Kara is 36, and she runs, or ran, a lifestyle blog called Posh Roots, a feed of airbrushed charcuterie boards, sponsored posts about non-toxic oat milk, and staged photos of her repotting succulents in designer overalls. She had 11,000 followers who believed she was a domestic sage. I knew she was a forger of a different kind. Within a day of the funeral, they'd set up a command center at my dining table. Kara's heels clicked across the hardwood as she pointed to my china hutch and said, "We can consign this, it's very heavy." She tugged open my linen closet and made a face at the stacks of pressed tablecloths my mother had embroidered. Brent kept patting my hand and saying, "You don't have to think about anything, Mom. We're here to manage." The word manage flattened me like a rolling pin. They weren't there to help. They were there to manage me out of my own life. I retreated to Thomas's study that evening, needing air that still smelled like his drafting pencils and the faint menthol of the tiger balm he rubbed on his temples. They'd already started boxing up his books, stacking them spine down in a cardboard box without any regard for his careful cataloging system. On the shelf behind his old drafting chair, where he kept reference volumes on timber framing and Japanese joinery, I spotted a small wooden box I didn't recognize. It was about 6 inches square, with an intricate mother-of-pearl inlay on the lid, a geometric pattern Thomas had once used on a custom cabinet for a client in the Berkshires. I reached for it, and Brent's voice cut from the doorway. "What's that? More junk." He took it from my hands before I could answer, shook it hard so I could hear a dull rattle inside, then tossed it into a cardboard box marked donation. "We'll drop this whole load off tomorrow. Don't worry, it's just clutter. Honestly, Dad hoarded a lot of tchotchkes." I nodded, my face slack and grief-numbed, but my mind was suddenly sharp like a scalpel on a whetstone. Thomas never bought small decorative boxes. He built them. Every box in our house, from my jewelry armoire to the pencil case on his desk, had been fabricated in his workshop. And if he'd hidden one in plain sight, cluttered among his reference books, it was for a reason. Later that night, while they slept in the guest room with the door shut, I crept downstairs in my bare feet and dug the box out of the donation pile. I locked myself in the powder room, the only room with a sturdy deadbolt Thomas had installed after a rash of break-ins 15 years ago. The box's latch was a clever little brass slider, positioned where the inlay formed a star. I pushed it, and the lid lifted silently. Inside, resting on a piece of faded burgundy velvet, were 3 old keys, a tiny brass compass, and a folded slip of tracing paper. I recognized 2 of the keys immediately. The Schlage key to our first apartment on Maple Street, where we'd lived when Thomas was still an apprentice, and the tiny safe deposit box key from our honeymoon trip to Montreal, where we'd stored our passports and a bottle of maple whiskey. The compass had been his father's, a World War II surplus Linsatic compass that Thomas carried on every hike we ever took. The 3rd key was unfamiliar, a small tubular key with a blue plastic head, but I knew it would reveal itself in time. I unfolded the tracing paper and saw Thomas's handwriting, neat and precise as an architectural script. Read, "My love, if they ever try to take the gnomes, look inside the one with the cracked hat. You'll know which one. Trust no one but yourself." My hands trembled. Otto, he meant Otto, an 18-inch gnome sculpted in 1926 with a pointed red hat, a white beard, a wheelbarrow full of tiny ceramic flowers, and a hairline crack running diagonally across the hat, a cosmetic flaw that made him slightly less valuable but infinitely more memorable. I had repaired dozens of similar stress fractures in museum pieces, so I knew exactly where that crack was and how deep it could go. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake in my bedroom, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the McModern Guest Suite's cheap construction, and I began to plan. At 6 the next morning, I told Brent I needed to pick up a prescription from the pharmacy. He offered to drive me, but I waved him off with a vague gesture, saying I needed the fresh air and the routine. I drove the opposite direction, to a climate-controlled storage unit across town where I'd stored the more fragile, historically significant gnomes, the ones not in daily rotation at the studio. The unit was dusty and cold, smelling of cardboard and old cedar. Otto sat on a middle shelf, wrapped in acid-free tissue and tied with a cotton ribbon I'd added myself. I unwrapped him, set him on the folding aluminum table I'd brought, and switched on my headlamp. The crack was faint, no wider than a strand of silk, but under magnification it showed a slight step, a misalignment of the glaze on either side. I ran a dental pick along the fissure and felt a subtle give, deeper than any normal crazing. My stomach tightened. I retrieved my field restoration kit from the trunk of my car. I always kept a compact kit, a magnifying loupe, an array of probes and fine-tipped tweezers, micro-suction cups, reversible adhesives, and a butane-powered wax tool for melting old shellac. I examined the base of the gnome. The green felt bottom was glued on a little too thickly, the adhesive a modern PVA rather than the original animal glue that would have been used in the 1920s. Someone had been here before me, and recently. Thomas had likely intervened before his death. Using a number 11 scalpel, I worked the blade under the felt pad, warming the adhesive with my butane tool to soften it without damaging the plaster beneath. Slowly, the pad peeled away, revealing a recessed circular plug of plaster, tamped down with the careful pressure of an expert hand. I'd seen this technique before, in a 15th century Florentine lunette that I'd opened to reveal a reliquary hidden during the Counter-Reformation. I used a needle probe to carefully slide into the seam, easing the plug loose. It came out with a soft pop, and inside the hollow body of Otto, nestled in a nest of cotton batting, were a rolled document wrapped in wax paper and a second sealed envelope bearing Thomas's wax stamp, the compass rose he'd designed for his architectural firm. I drew them out with the reverence of a curator handling a Gutenberg Bible. The rolled document was the original partnership agreement for Gnome and Thorn, dated 18 months ago, notarized by an attorney named Elena Vasquez. There was my signature, wet ink black, and Kara's loopy cursive. And beneath the boilerplate, a clause I had almost forgotten. Section 8. 3. This agreement may only be amended, dissolved, or terminated by the joint, in-person appearance of both parties before a notary public at First Fidelity Bank, utilizing the signature samples and photographic identity verification on file. Any attempted unilateral dissolution shall be null and void ab initio. I read that phrase, null and void ab initio, 3 times, each syllable a small stone dropping into the well of my heart. The envelope contained a letter from Thomas, dated the day after the studio's grand opening. I sat on a stack of storage bins, my headlamp illuminating the careful cursive. He wrote, "My love, I've never trusted Kara's charm, and I've seen too many architects lose their life's work to a slick son-in-law's signature." I filed a dead man's switch instruction with First Fidelity's compliance department. The studio's corporate account is flagged. No transfer over $10,000 can execute without your physical presence and a verbal passcode only you know, the name of the street where we first kissed. If you're reading this, then I've already passed and they've shown their hand. Use the contract. Save yourself. All my love, T. The street where we first kissed was Birchwood Lane, on a snowy December night after a lecture on Frank Lloyd Wright. No one else knew that. No one would ever guess it. I refolded the papers, slid them into my jacket, and replaced Otto's plug with museum-grade reversible adhesive and a fresh square of felt. I drove home with the calm, deadly clarity of someone who has just found a loaded weapon in a dark house. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that the best revenge is to turn someone's own scheme into their undoing. The manipulation phase began that very afternoon. Kara set a cup of chamomile tea in front of me, steam curling over the rim of a cup she'd taken from my own china cabinet, and sat down with a folder embossed with the name of a local elder law firm. "I know it's hard, Evelyn, but we need to get your estate in order," she said, her voice dripping with practiced sympathy. "You don't need to understand all the paperwork. Just sign here, and we'll handle everything. We'll even move you into our guest suite so you're not alone in this big house, rattling around like a marble in a box." I looked at the document. It was a durable power of attorney and a quitclaim deed transferring my house, my 5-bedroom Victorian with the wraparound porch Thomas built, into an irrevocable trust controlled by Brent and Kara as co-trustees. I played the part of the fragile widow perfectly. I squinted, held the page at arm's length, let my hand tremble over the signature line, and said, "Oh, the print is so small. I can't seem to focus, and I'm feeling a little dizzy. Can we revisit this next week? I just need to rest." Kara's smile tightened by a millimeter, the way a porcelain glaze crazes under too much heat. "Of course, Mom," Brent said from the doorway, patting my hand yet again. They never did learn that a hand pat could be an insult, a dismissal, a signal that you were no longer a person but an obstacle. Over the next 2 days, the pressure escalated. Kara would corner me in the hallway with a new form, a simple beneficiary update that looked innocuous, but upon closer inspection, redirected all of Thomas's life insurance proceeds to a joint account she and Brent controlled. She brought in a therapist, a friend of hers named Miranda, who sat with me and gently suggested that I might be experiencing the early stages of cognitive decline, that it was normal for women my age to need help managing finances. I nodded along, my mind racing. I knew gaslighting when I smelled it. I'd dealt with crooked antique dealers who'd tried to convince me a reproduction vase was genuine, and I'd always spotted the slip. They moved me into their sprawling McModern home in the gated subdivision of Willow Ridge, a house with 12-foot ceilings, white marble floors, and the emotional warmth of a hotel lobby. My room was a pale gray box with a hospital-style adjustable bed, a plastic pitcher on the nightstand, and a baby monitor plugged into the wall, its little green light staring at me like a cyclops. I was a prisoner in plain sight, but I had an unregistered prepaid phone I'd bought at a drugstore, a micro recorder disguised as a USB drive, and a mind trained by decades of scrutinizing brushstrokes and fractures. The undercover investigation began with listening. Every morning, from 9 until 10:30, Kara's voice would carry from her home office down the hall, shrill and agitated. I would sit on the edge of my bed, the baby monitor turned off but the sound traveling through the thin walls, and catalog every word. She was talking to a man named Doug Pritchard, the acquisitions director for Evergreen Garden Centers, a national chain with nearly 80 locations across the Southeast. I pieced together the timeline. They had signed a letter of intent to purchase Gnome and Thorne's original molds, the trademarked name, and the entire historic Gnome collection for a lump sum of $520,000. A wire transfer had been initiated from Evergreen's corporate account to the studio's business account at First Fidelity, but the funds were frozen pending a compliance verification that Kara insisted was a formality, a glitch she could resolve. At night after Brent came home, they'd sit on the back patio with a bottle of wine and discuss their spending. I would crack my bathroom window, which overlooked the patio, and listen. New patio furniture, a full sectional and fire pit from Restoration Hardware, had cost $12,000. The lease on a Range Rover, pearl white with a dual-pane panoramic roof, was eating up another $100 a month. They put a non-refundable deposit on a 2-week timeshare in Cabo San Lucas, the kind with an infinity pool and a concierge. They were spending money they didn't yet have, convinced the freeze would lift any day. I heard Brent say, "Just get her to the bank. Once we can bypass that stupid identity check, we're golden." Kara responded, her voice a low, casual hiss. "She's foggy. A few more days of the sedatives and her chamomile tea and she'll sign anything. I've been doubling the dose." I stopped drinking their tea after that. I poured it into the potted orchid on my windowsill, which withered and died within 2 days, confirming my suspicion. I began hoarding water bottles, filling them from the bathroom tap, and hiding them in my suitcase. I ate only prepackaged snacks from my secret stash of granola bars. A household accident gave me my first concrete window to observe their deeper desperation. The kitchen sink's garbage disposal jammed, and the undersink plumbing sprang a slow leak, flooding the tile floor with gray water that smelled of old broccoli. Kara panicked, scrolling through emergency plumber numbers on her phone, her acrylic nails tapping the screen in staccato bursts. "Nobody can come until tomorrow, and it's going to cost a fortune," she whined. "The water's seeping into the grout. This house is only 3 years old." I walked into the kitchen and said calmly, "Let me look. I grew up in my father's hardware store. I fixed 1,000 sinks, and this one's just a jammed impeller blade and a loose slip joint nut." She laughed, that dismissive little puff of air, but followed me to the sink. I got down on my knees, retrieved a wrench from under the sink myself, and systematically disassembled the P-trap, catching the rank water in a bucket. I pulled out a matted clump of potato peelings and a broken wine glass stem from the disposal chamber, then used a bent coat hanger to fish out a glob of compacted grease. I reassembled the trap with new fiber washers, tightened the slip nut until it was snug, and tested the disposal. It hummed cleanly. When I stood up, wiping my hands on an old rag, Kara's face was a mask of shock. "I didn't know you could do that," she said, her voice thin. "There's a lot you don't know, Kara," I replied, my eyes meeting hers without the slightest tremor. "I've spent my life fixing things people thought were beyond saving." That evening, I noticed a new hitch in her confident stride, a glimmer of uncertainty that told me the dynamic was shifting. My next move required a deeper infiltration. I had noticed that Brent's home office, a converted den off the main hallway, had a quick-set entry lock, and that he and Kara kept it locked even when they were just in the living room. I knew that lock. My father had run a hardware store and did locksmithing on the side, rekeying deadbolts and mortised locks for half the town. He taught me to use a tension wrench and a Bogota rake when I was 12, so I'd never be locked out of the shop. I still had my small leather kit, which I'd hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of a Jane Austen novel in my suitcase. 2 nights later, at around 2 in the morning, when the house was silent except for the hum of the HVAC, I retrieved the kit and knelt by the office door. I inserted the tension wrench into the bottom of the keyway and applied light torque, then raked the pins with the Bogota rake. The quickset lock surrendered in under 40 seconds, a soft click that felt like a victory. Inside, the room smelled of burnt coffee and cheap cologne. A 4-drawer filing cabinet sat in the corner. The top drawer had a standard wafer lock. I raked it open even faster. Behind a hanging folder labeled Tax Receipts, I found a file simply titled Gnome and Thorn Transfer. The file contained a document titled Mutual Dissolution of Partnership, bearing a forged version of my signature that looked like a 5th grader had traced it from a goodbye card I'd sent last Christmas. The loops were shaky. The E in my name slanted the wrong way. Stapled to it was a copy of a notary certificate, signed by a Margaret Plimpton, with a stamp number that looked too fresh. I photographed it with my phone. Behind that was the purchase agreement from Evergreen Garden Centers, a 9-page document offering $520,000 for all physical and intellectual property assets. And there, in a printed email chain, was the smoking gun. Kara had emailed Margaret Plimpton directly, explicitly asking, "Can you expedite a notarization without the second party present? She's elderly and mentally compromised, and we're trying to protect the family business from her erratic decisions. I can provide a signature sample from a recent greeting card." Plimpton's response was, "For an additional $500 processing fee, I can handle it remotely. I just need a clear scanned copy of her signature. I'll backdate the journal entry." I photographed every page, my hands steady as a surgeon's. I also found bank statements showing that the Evergreen wire transfer of $520,000 had arrived at the studio's First Fidelity business account, but the transaction status read, "Frozen. Identity verification failed pending compliance review." Below that, a revised statement showed that Kara had attempted to transfer the funds to a personal checking account at a credit union in Nevada, but that transfer was also frozen. But I needed more, because the email chain and the forged signature alone might be dismissed as a misunderstanding. I needed to confirm the notary fraud and tie it all together. I retrieved a small evidence bag from my kit and carefully lifted a fingerprint from the glossy surface of the forged dissolution document, using a strip of lifting tape I'd packed. I didn't know if it would hold up in court, but it was a start. I also began reconstructing shredded documents from the office trash. Every morning, before the housekeeper arrived, I'd slip into the office and retrieve the contents of the shredder bin. Using a roll of invisible tape and a piece of glass from a picture frame, I'd piece together strips in my locked bathroom, a puzzle that took me 3 nights. I reconstructed a practice sheet where Kara had traced my signature 27 times, some attempts with the pen lifted mid-loop as she corrected herself. I also taped together a photocopy of a voided check with my signature, the one I'd used to buy potting soil a month ago. She'd been practicing. The hair on my arms stood up. The ally emerged unexpectedly. I needed to understand the exact mechanics of Thomas's dead man's switch, so I called First Fidelity Bank using my prepaid phone, sitting in the closet with the door shut. I asked to speak with the compliance officer handling the Gnome and Thorn account. After a series of transfers, I reached Patricia Doyle, a woman in her 50s with a voice like a granite countertop. I introduced myself and gave her my account number. She immediately shifted into a formal, careful tone. "Mrs. Hall, I'm very glad you called. Your late husband filed a specific instruction with our fraud prevention unit 18 months ago. He was concerned that a family member might attempt a hostile takeover of the studio. He placed what we call a hold for positive identification on the corporate account. Any transaction exceeding $10,000 requires the account holder, that's you, to appear in person at our main branch, present a wet ink signature that matches our biometric sample, and provide a verbal passcode he registered with us." The attempted dissolution included a notarized document, but the signature failed digital vector comparison. The stroke order and pressure points didn't match, and the notary's credentials were flagged after our automated system ran her stamp number against the state registry. Margaret Plimpton's commission was revoked 6 years ago for misconduct. She's been operating on a forged stamp. We immediately froze the funds and notified Evergreen's fraud department. Right now, that $520 is in a suspense account, and the sale is in limbo. If you can provide the original contract proving you never approved the dissolution and any evidence of the forgery, we can void the sale entirely, return the funds to Evergreen, and refer the matter to the Financial Crimes Division of the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. Would you be willing to do that? I told her I had the original contract, the forged documents, the reconstructed signature practice sheets, the email chain, and a video recording I plan to obtain. She gave me her direct line and a secure email address, and we arranged to meet at the main branch at 9 a.m. The following Monday, she'd have Special Agent Mendoza from the Postal Inspection Service and an FBI liaison present because the use of a forged notary seal and interstate wire transfers made this a federal crime. Before I hung up, Patricia added softly, "Your husband was a remarkable man. He came in to set up this arrangement in person, and he told us, 'My wife can fix anything, but I want to make sure she never has to fix what I can prevent.'" I thanked her, my throat tight, and tucked the phone back into my hiding place. The maximum cruelty beat came on Friday afternoon, 4 days before my meeting. I needed to know, beyond any remaining shred of doubt, whether Brent had any humanity left or if Kara had consumed him entirely. I staged a collapse. I'd been building up fatigue for days, eating less, moving slowly, letting my face look gaunt. I waited until I heard Kara's office door open and her heels clicking down the hallway toward the kitchen. I slipped into the kitchen ahead of her, set my phone to record video, and positioned it inside an empty cereal box on the counter, a hole cut through the cardboard just big enough for the lens. The box was angled perfectly to capture the spot on the floor next to the island. Then I crumpled to the tile, gasping, clutching my chest, my other arm splayed out as if I'd tried to catch myself. I let my eyes flutter half-closed, but I could still see through my lashes. Kara entered. She saw me on the floor. Her face flickered, not with concern, not with fear, but with the briefest flash of impatience, like I was a delivery that had cost her time. She stepped over my outstretched arm, her ballet flat grazing my wrist, and reached for a manila envelope on the counter. She ripped it open, scanned the contents, and muttered almost to herself, "Finally! The updated signature card from the bank. Just need your thumbprint on this, and once you're gone, I'll have everything." She blew out a breath, turned, and walked out without once bending down to check if I was breathing. She didn't call 911. She didn't even look back. I lay there for another 30 seconds, counting my heartbeats, feeling the cold tile against my cheek, and then slowly got to my feet. I retrieved the phone, stopped the recording, and watched the playback on the tiny screen. My chest hollowed out, and for the first time since Thomas's death, I let myself cry, not from grief but from the sheer, scalding clarity of what I'd just witnessed. I sent a copy of the video to my cloud account and to Patricia's secure email. That video, I decided, would be the last gift I ever gave my son and his wife. Monday morning arrived misty and cool. Kara dressed me in a pressed floral blouse and told me we were going to do a little banking errand to finally close the estate and release the escrow hold on the business sale. She said it with a smile that showed all her teeth. Brent drove. They'd been told by the bank that the funds could only be released if I appeared in person with identification, so they'd concocted a story about closing a joint account. I played along, nodding and murmuring, my hands folded in my lap. The envelope containing the original contract, the letter from Thomas, and a printed screenshot of the email chain was tucked flat against my body, inside a compression tank I'd sewn a hidden pocket into. I'd worn it under my blouse. At the bank, Patricia Doyle met us at the entrance, flanked by a tall man in a dark suit with a USPS badge and a woman in a navy pantsuit who identified herself as Special Agent Mendoza, Financial Crimes Division. Kara's eyes darted. Brent started sweating, a sheen on his forehead that I'd never seen before. Patricia led us not to a teller window but into a conference room with frosted glass and a mahogany table, the air cooled by 10 degrees. Kara slapped a document onto the table with a flourish. "Just sign here, Mom. This is the release of funds authorization. It transfers the $520,000 from the suspense account into my personal account at Silver State Credit Union. It's all standard, and then we can go home and you can rest." I picked up the pen, a heavy silver rollerball, and looked at the form. I set the pen down. I said, "No." Kara's voice sharpened into a blade. "This isn't optional, Evelyn. We've done everything to help you. You owe us this." I looked her straight in the eyes, and my voice was calm, even, as if I were describing a glazing technique to a student. You forged a partnership dissolution. You conscripted a corrupt, disbarred notary to stamp it. You've been doubling the dose of sedatives in my tea for weeks. And 3 days ago, you stepped over my dying body in your kitchen to grab an envelope containing a signature card you planned to forge. I have the video, Kara. I have the original contract with the ab initio clause. I have the email where you offered Margaret Plimpton $500 to commit a felony. I have the practice sheets you shredded, taped back together like a mosaic of your greed. And I have a dead man's switch set by my husband, a man who loved me enough to protect me from you. The conference room stilled into a held breath. Kara's face went white, then a splotchy red. That's insane. You're a confused old woman and none of that will hold up. She turned to Patricia. She's obviously delusional. I have power of attorney. Patricia didn't blink. Actually, the durable power of attorney you filed was rejected by our legal department because the notarization was flagged as fraudulent. Mrs. Hall is the sole signatory on the corporate account, and she's proven with biometric evidence that the dissolution is void. I unrolled the original contract on the table. The notarization seal of Alina Vasquez glinted under the fluorescent lights. This is the valid agreement. I never signed your forgery, and these federal agents are here to arrest you. Special Agent Mendoza stepped forward, her handcuffs already out. Kara Hall, you are under arrest for felony forgery, financial fraud exceeding $50,000, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. You have the right to remain silent. As she recited the rights, Brent stammered. I didn't know anything, but Mendoza's partner led him outside for questioning. Patricia handed me a formal notice that the funds would be returned to Evergreen Garden Centers within 48 hours, the sale voided, and the studio's assets fully unfrozen under my sole control. I signed one document that day, an affidavit attesting to the forgery, and I included a thumbprint that matched the one on file. The pen felt like a wand. The legal machinery ground forward with satisfying precision. Evergreen Garden Centers, furious at being dragged into a fraud scheme, cooperated fully with the investigation, and their general counsel sent me a letter saying they would never do business with anyone associated with Kara Hall again, a blessing in disguise. Kara pleaded guilty to 1 count of felony forgery, 1 count of fraud over $50,000, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit elder abuse. Her trial was brief because the evidence, my video, the reconstructed signature practice sheets, the email chain, left no room for doubt. The judge, a woman named Honorable Judith Cross, who had granddaughters of her own and a soft spot for garden gnomes, sentenced Kara to 3 years of supervised probation, $520,000 in restitution to the business estate, and to me personally, $78,000 in punitive damages, and 500 hours of community service. Then she added a creative condition, one I gently suggested through my victim impact statement. The community service must be performed at the very pottery studio involved in the crime, performing manual labor under my direct supervision, in a public-facing capacity. Kara's assets were seized, the Range Rover, the timeshare deposit, the patio furniture, all of it liquidated to cover the restitution. Her lifestyle blog Posh Roots was deleted, and her 11,000 followers scattered like dandelion fluff. Brent filed for divorce before the ink on the sentencing was dry. He tried to reconcile with me months later, sending a stilted 4-page apology letter that mentioned his own pain 17 times. I left it unopened on my desk, where I keep a small ceramic gnome wearing a judge's robe, hand-painted by Lily. I reclaimed the studio, renamed it Gnome of Deceit Pottery, and threw open the doors with a grand reopening party that made the local news. The story, a widow who outsmarted a fraudster using a hidden contract inside a 1926 garden gnome, went tiny viral in the craft and antique communities. Suddenly, everyone wanted a gnome with a story. Business quadrupled. I hired a real staff, including 2 retired ceramic restorers I knew from my museum days, and we expanded the fairy garden workshops. I even created a signature line of whistleblower gnomes, each holding a tiny scroll. And yes, Kara shows up twice a week, in a cotton smock I had embroidered with Chip Trust in cursive across the back. She sits at a glazing station in the front window, hand-painting gnomes according to a design I approve. Every piece she finishes must have its base stamped with her case number, 2024 CF0712, a permanent record of her fraud. Customers ask to take selfies with her. She hates it, and she can't refuse because it's court-ordered. One little girl asked her if she was a real-life villain, and Kara's forced smile was a masterpiece of misery. Lily and Rose got their fairy garden gnomes, one for each birthday, handcrafted by me with a hidden compartment in the base where I tuck a tiny note about self-respect and boundaries. I deliver them with a kiss on the forehead. The notes are simple. Trust your gut. Check the crack in the hat. They have no idea about the compartments yet, but one day, when they are old enough to understand the story of their grandmother and the gnome named Otto, they will. Thomas's brilliance still leaves me breathless. He saw what I couldn't see, a vulture dressed in yoga pants and non-toxic nail polish. He built a dead man's switch and hid the key inside a piece of kitsch that everyone else dismissed as worthless. I learned that sometimes the ugliest object in the room holds the most value, and the most beautiful person holds the sharpest knife. Integrity isn't a grand gesture. It's a quiet, stubborn refusal to let the vultures win. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments. And if this story resonated, please hit like and subscribe to the channel for more tales of family, betrayal, and the quiet artillery of a well-kept contract. Until next time, remember, always check the crack in the hat.